"You're not a son, you're a punishment." That was what my biological father used to say to me. He and my mother abandoned me with a notarized envelope renouncing custody when I was just 8 years old. 21 years later, they came back after I became a famous model making millions of dollars a year. Not to apologize, but to demand money and fame. Stay with me. I will tell you what I went through and how I handled it when they came looking for me again. Hello everyone. My name is Tanner Harper. I'm 29 years old. Right now, I'm living in Manhattan, New York. I have a port wine birthmark stretching from my forehead to my left cheek. It used to be why people hated and rejected me, but now it's become a unique trademark in the high fashion industry. My life today feels like a dream, with a thriving career and a blooming relationship with my girlfriend, Violet. Violet is a Mexican-born model with 2.3 million followers on Instagram. We've been together for 3 years. I first met her during a photo shoot at a studio in Milan. She was 24 back then and I was 26. She told me on the first day, "You have something most models don't. You have a soul." That one sentence left a strong impression on both of us, and a few months later, we officially became a couple. But it would be wrong not to mention my adoptive mother, Katie Harper. I owe everything I have today to Katie, my 52-year-old adoptive mom who rescued me from a hellish childhood and loved me like her own son. She's now enjoying retirement in a 5-bedroom Georgian-style home with a 2-acre lavender garden in Stowe, Vermont. That house was a gift I bought for her last year. I still remember when Katie walked into that house for the first time. She burst into tears and said, "My son, I never thought I'd ever have a home this beautiful." And I told her, "You deserve every good thing in this world. Without you, I wouldn't be where I am today." Even though my life right now feels pretty perfect, I still can't forget what happened a year ago when my biological parents forced their way back into my life after abandoning me for 21 years. The family drama I'm about to share happened on a February morning last year, right after I landed my 3rd magazine cover with the headline, "The Face of the Future." I remember that morning vividly. My phone rang when I was sitting in my room, sipping coffee and reading the paper. Seeing the name Mike Thompson on the screen, I immediately knew something serious was happening. Mike is a veteran publicist. He has over 20 years of experience handling media crises, and he rarely calls me before 9 a.m. unless it's an emergency or a major scandal. As soon as I picked up, Mike spoke with a tense voice. "Tanner, we've got a big problem. I just got word from a reporter I know in Cleveland. 2 people claiming to be your biological parents are about to hold a press conference at the Aloft Cleveland downtown hotel in 2 hours." Right after he said that, my hands started to shake, and I almost dropped my coffee cup. Trying to stay calm, I asked Mike, "What the hell is this? I already have a mom, Katie Harper. She raised me since I was 8. Then Mike, with an even more serious tone, said, "They're accusing Katie of kidnapping you when you were 8. They're demanding to regain custody and seeking financial compensation for what they're calling 21 years of emotional suffering and lost parental rights." At that moment, it felt like my whole world was collapsing. Memories I had buried for 21 years came rushing back like a tsunami. I thought I had escaped my past for good. I thought Bruce Dawson and Whitney Dawson, the 2 people who abandoned me so cruelly, would never reappear in my life. Mike continued with urgency in his voice, "Tanner, they've hired a lawyer and a PR team. They know exactly what they're doing. This isn't some impulsive move. They've planned this carefully." After those words, I felt a deep anger rise from the pit of my stomach. 21 years of silence. 21 years without a single call. Not one letter. Not even a word asking if I was alive. And now, when I'm successful, my face is on major magazine covers and earning millions of dollars, and they show up like vultures smelling rotting meat. To help you understand why I was so angry, I need to tell you about my childhood in Middletown, Ohio. It's a small town where everyone knows each other's business, and rumors spread like wildfire. I was born on March 15, 1995, at Miami Valley Hospital, with a massive port wine birthmark covering nearly 40% of the left side of my face. The mark stretched from my forehead, across my left eye, down to my cheek, and nearly to my chin. It was a deep red, like a dark wine, standing harshly against my pale skin. At the time, Dr. Richardson explained to Bruce and Whitney that it was a congenital birthmark. It wasn't painful or dangerous to my health, but it would be permanent and might darken over time. He also mentioned a few laser treatments that could help when I got older, but they were costly and not covered by insurance. From the time I was very young, my birth mother, Whitney, never once looked me straight in the face. Whenever I tried to come close to her as a little kid, she would turn away or push me to the other side of the room. My biological father, Bruce, was even worse. He didn't just ignore me, he actively hated me. When I was 6, I accidentally dropped a glass of water on the floor. He exploded like a bomb and shouted, "That birthmark? Proof I was cursed with a mistake. You're not a son. You're a punishment." And when I was little, every time someone came to the house, whether it was a neighbor or the guy reading the electric meter, Bruce would whisper to me, "Go upstairs right now and don't come down until they're gone. You'll scare people and embarrass the whole family." I was systematically excluded from every family activity. I was told to stand behind the camera when Whitney took holiday pictures with relatives. I was fed in the kitchen at family gatherings at my grandparents' house while everyone else ate in the dining room. School events were even worse. I was banned from class pictures starting in kindergarten. When Lincoln Elementary held its spring festival, Whitney told the teachers, "Tanner's sick and can't attend." But the truth was she didn't want other parents to see me and associate their families with that disfigured kid. The most painful part was having to wear a medical mask every time I stepped outside. Whitney told the neighbors I had breathing issues, but really, she just wanted to hide my face. I remember how suffocating that mask felt, how it made me feel like a monster that had to be hidden away from the world. And in that whole world filled with hatred and rejection, there was only one person who treated me like a normal human being. That person was Katie Harper, who would later become my adoptive mother. Katie had been Whitney's best friend since high school. They met at Middletown High School and stayed close for years. At the time, Katie was 31, a nurse, single and childless. She lived in a small, cozy house on Elm Street, about 15 minutes from our home. Katie had warm brown eyes and a smile that was always bright. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of voice you could trust when you heard it. Whenever Katie visited our family, she would immediately look for me. She didn't flinch when she saw my birthmark, didn't turn her face away in discomfort, and didn't pretend I didn't exist. Instead, Katie would kneel to my eye level and say, "Hey there, handsome little guy. How are you today, sweetheart?" The first time I heard the word handsome, I didn't know how to respond. No one had ever called me handsome before. Most people either avoided eye contact or stared at me with pity. When I turned 5, Katie started bringing small gifts each time she visited. They weren't expensive toys, just simple things like picture books, colored pencils, or animal-shaped stickers. She would sit with me on the living room floor, helping me color and reading stories. I remember one time Katie read me the story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. After finishing it, she said, "You know, Rudolph was different from all the other reindeer, but that made him special. And you're just like him, Tanner. You're different, and that's what makes you wonderful." When I was 6, Katie walked in on Whitney, forcing me to wear a mask inside the house because guests were coming over. Katie confronted her immediately. She said, "Whitney, what are you doing? Tanner is a beautiful child. He doesn't need to hide his face." Whitney got defensive and replied, "Katie, you don't understand. People stare. They judge. I'm protecting him." But Katie didn't back down. She said firmly, "You're not protecting him. You're teaching him to be ashamed of himself. That birthmark doesn't define him. His character and his heart do." That was the first time I ever heard someone stand up for me. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening to every word, and I felt for the first time that someone truly cared about me. After that confrontation, Whitney started limiting Katie's visits. She said Katie was interfering with parenting decisions and confusing the child. But Katie still found ways to see me, sometimes at the grocery store, sometimes at the park, and she always said to me, "Remember, sweetheart, you were the perfect little boy." Then, in June 2003, when I was 8 years old, Bruce and Whitney's financial situation hit rock bottom. By that time, Bruce had started developing a gambling habit. He spent his evenings at the casino, blowing his entire paycheck on poker and slot machines, always convinced that a big win was just around the corner. Things took a serious turn when Bruce lost $15,000 in one night playing poker. That amount was twice his monthly salary. To cover the debt, he borrowed money from local loan sharks, the kind of people who weren't known for their patience. Meanwhile, Whitney lost her job at Walmart due to repeated absences. The manager had warned her several times about not showing up without notice, but Whitney always blamed it on the stress of caring for a disabled child. One Friday in early August, when the loan sharks began making threatening phone calls and even showing up at the house, Bruce decided the only solution was to go to Las Vegas and try to win it all back. He had a friend named Jerry Martinez who worked at a casino in Vegas and promised to give Bruce some inside information about high-stakes poker tables. Bruce believed that with the last $5,000 left in his bank account, he could turn it into $50,000 and solve all their problems. But there was one problem. They couldn't take me with them. Taking care of an 8-year-old in Las Vegas while trying to gamble wasn't possible. And they didn't want to spend money on a babysitter either. That's when Whitney thought of Katie Harper. The next afternoon, Bruce drove to Katie's house on Elm Street. When Katie opened the door, Bruce spoke in a voice that was trying hard to sound sincere. "Katie, we need a favor. We need you to watch Tanner for a few days. We must go to Las Vegas to handle some urgent financial stuff." After that request, Katie agreed right away without asking too many questions. She thought it was just a short trip and that Bruce and Whitney would return to pick me up as usual. 3 days went by. I was happy staying at Katie's house, and for the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to be truly loved and cared for. During those days, Katie cooked delicious meals, read bedtime stories, and never told me to hide my face. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, Katie received a package from a courier service. When she opened it in the living room, she was utterly shocked. Inside was a thick envelope containing documents signed and notarized at the Butler County Courthouse. They were custody relinquishment papers. At the bottom of the page were the clear signatures of Bruce Dawson and Whitney Dawson, along with the official seal of a notary public. There was also a separate handwritten note from Whitney. The writing was rushed and uneven. It said, "We can't take care of him anymore. Please help us. We know Katie can love him more than we ever could." In those few quiet minutes, I watched as Katie read that note over and over again, her hands trembling. She couldn't believe that two parents could abandon their child so coldly. Right after that, Katie tried calling every phone number she had for Bruce and Whitney, but none of them went through. She even drove to their house on Oak Street. The place looked deserted. The mailbox was stuffed with letters, and a yellow notice was taped to the door. It was an eviction notice for non-payment of rent. At that moment, Katie pulled me into her arms and said in a choked voice, "Sweetheart, from now on, I'm going to take care of you. I will never leave you." As an 8-year-old, I didn't fully understand what was happening at that time, but I could feel the sincerity in Katie's voice. I wrapped my arms around her and asked, "Can I stay with you forever, Miss Katie?" Katie cried and answered right away, "Yes, my love, you will stay with me forever." That same week, Katie went to the Hamilton County Family Court and petitioned for official adoption. The legal process moved relatively quickly since she already had the notarized custody relinquishment papers. At the time, Judge Susan Martinez, a 50-year-old woman with many years of experience in family cases, interviewed me privately in her office. She asked if I wanted to live with Katie, and I nodded eagerly. I told the judge, "Miss Katie is nice to me. She doesn't make me wear a mask. She says I'm handsome." After I said that, Judge Martinez looked at the birthmark on my face, then into my eyes with a look of understanding. She nodded and smiled. In the years that followed, Katie worked tirelessly to support me. A nurse's salary at the time was about $30,000 a year, not much to raise a child with special needs. On top of financial pressure, Katie also faced judgment from society and whispers from neighbors, friends, and even family. People said she was crazy for adopting me. But Katie never wavered in the face of gossip. Every time someone said something negative about me, she would respond calmly but firmly, "My son will prove you all wrong. Just wait and see." The first time I called Katie Mom was when I was 10, during an ordinary dinner. We were having spaghetti and meatballs, my favorite meal, and I said, "Mom, can I have some more cheese?" Katie was sipping water at the time. When she heard that, she nearly choked. She set down her glass, her eyes full of tears, and smiled as she replied gently, "Of course, my sweet boy." From that moment on, Katie truly became my mom in every sense of the word. She attended every parent-teacher conference, never missed a soccer game I played in, even though I was always on the bench, and was always there whenever I needed her. In 2012, when I was 17 and getting ready to graduate with decent grades, Katie decided to take me to New York on a graduation trip. She had been saving money for 2 years to afford it. That trip ended up changing my life completely. That year, we stayed at a small hotel in Queens, about 45 minutes by subway from Manhattan. We explored famous tourist spots like the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, Central Park, and especially Times Square every day. On the 3rd day of the trip, We were standing in the middle of Times Square, overwhelmed by the giant billboards and the non-stop crowds. Katie was taking a photo of me when a young man walked up to us and said, "Hi, I'm Marcus, a street photographer. You've got something special. That birthmark isn't a flaw. It's your signature. Can I take a few photos of you?" At first, I hesitated, but Katie encouraged me. "Give it a try, sweetheart. This could be an opportunity." After that, Marcus took about 30 shots in Times Square, then moved us to Central Park for a more natural background. Throughout the session, he kept complimenting me. "Amazing. That birthmark creates such a beautiful asymmetry. You have a very unique look." Marcus showed me the photos on his camera screen when the shoot was over. For the first time, I saw that I could look beautiful. In those pictures, the birthmark wasn't something to hide. It was the feature that made me stand out and drew people in. Marcus handed us his business card and said, "I'll edit these and send them to you. I'd also love to post a few on my Instagram if that's okay with you." A week after we returned to Ohio, Marcus sent us an email with 20 professionally edited photos. He also posted 3 of them on his Instagram. Within 24 hours, the photos went viral with over 25,000 likes and thousands of positive comments like, "He's handsome. That birthmark makes him look unique and striking. This is what real beauty looks like. No Photoshop needed. I want to know who he is." 2 days later, I got an email from an independent fashion magazine in Brooklyn. They invited me to be the cover model for their special issue on unconventional beauty. When we read that email, Katie burst into tears of joy. The photo shoot took place at a small studio in Soho in October 2012. It was my first time experiencing a professional shoot with a team of makeup artists, hairstylists, and lighting technicians. What stood out most was the makeup artist, a woman named Alex Rivera. She didn't try to hide my birthmark. Instead, she enhanced it using a highlighter to highlight its natural texture and color. At one point, Alex said to me, "We're not covering up what makes you special. We're celebrating it." After the makeup session, the shoot lasted 6 hours and was done in various outfits, from casual to formal. The lead photographer, David Park, gave me constant guidance on how to pose, use the light to my advantage, and, most importantly, be confident in myself. When the magazine was released in December, I was on the cover with the headline, "Beauty Redefined. Meet the face that's changing fashion standards." The 4-page article inside told my story and shared the message of redefining beauty standards. That issue sold out within a week, and they had to print 5,000 additional copies to meet demand. More importantly, the photos were widely shared on social media, especially Instagram and Facebook. And within just 1 month, I received emails from 3 modeling agencies in New York wanting to represent me. From 2012 to 2023, my career took off in a way I never imagined. My first primary job was a cover shoot for a well-known fashion magazine, The Face of the Future. I had the chance to work with a famous photographer and top wardrobe specialists, the kind of names most models only dream of working with. That shoot took place at a villa in the Italian countryside. It was my first time traveling abroad, and it felt surreal to see myself wearing luxury fashion in such a fairy tale-like setting. After that editorial, the offers started pouring in. High-end fashion brands wanted me for their campaigns. Some iconic fashion houses reached out to discuss collaborations. I got invitations to major fashion weeks. However, the real turning point came in September 2018 when a major fashion brand chose me as the face of their campaign called "Different is Beautiful." The campaign didn't just feature me. It also included models with vitiligo and physical disabilities. That was where I met Violet. She was one of the other models chosen for the campaign. From the moment we met, there was an instant connection. After the shoot, we went to dinner at a local restaurant. Violet opened up to me about her childhood and her challenges in the fashion industry. We officially started dating in December 2018. Our relationship quickly became a favorite topic in the fashion press. Back to that fateful morning last year. After hearing Mike's news about the press conference, I immediately called Katie. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "they're back." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Katie replied firmly, "My love, I've been waiting for this day for 21 years. We're going to fight them with everything we've got." Without hesitation, I booked a flight to Cleveland with my attorney, Amelia Jones. Amelia, 42 years old, is a senior partner at a respected law firm in Manhattan. She specializes in family law and defamation cases. She has handled many high-profile cases and is known for never compromising when defending her clients. The flight from JFK to Cleveland Hopkins took just 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity. I kept replaying childhood memories the entire flight. All those moments when Bruce and Whitney treated me like garbage. The press conference had already begun when we arrived at the Marriott downtown Cleveland. The conference room was packed with journalists from local news stations, newspapers, and even a few national outlets that had started picking up the story. Bruce and Whitney were seated at a long table in front, with a young attorney beside them. Whitney began speaking in a trembling voice, one that was rehearsed. "I'm Whitney Dawson, the biological mother of Tanner Harper. 21 years ago, during a time of financial hardship, my closest friend, Katie Harper, took advantage of our situation and stole our son. Hearing such blatant lies made me feel physically sick." Amelia placed her hand on my arm to remind me to stay calm. Whitney continued her performance. "We never abandoned Tanner. We temporarily left him with Katie while handling a financial crisis, with the agreement that we would return. But when we came back, Katie had disappeared with our child." Bruce then spoke. "We spent years searching for our son. We hired private investigators, contacted the police, and did everything possible. Katie systematically hid Tanner from us and brainwashed him into believing we abandoned him." After that, their lawyer, a young man named Robert Stevens from a small Cleveland law firm, read a prepared statement. "The Dawson family is seeking the right to reunite with their son and financial compensation for the 21 years they were separated from him. They are also considering legal action against Katie Harper for kidnapping and unlawful guardianship." Amelia and I left the hotel in silence when the press conference ended. On the way back to the airport, Amelia looked at me and said, "Tanner, they just dug their own grave. These accusations are completely baseless, but we need to act fast." When I returned to New York, I immediately called Katie and booked her a last-minute flight to join us. At that point, we needed to gather every piece of evidence to fight back against the false accusations. Katie arrived in New York that evening, carrying an old cardboard box she had kept in her closet for 21 years. Inside were all the documents related to my abandonment and adoption. We sat in the living room and spread the materials on the coffee table. Violet sat beside us, hearing the whole story for the first time. First, Katie presented a photocopy of the courier envelope with Whitney's clear signature and a tracking number. This proved they had willingly sent the custody relinquishment documents and that Katie had not kidnapped me as they claimed. Second, the relinquishment papers were notarized at the Butler County Courthouse on August 16, 2003. They included the full signatures of both Bruce and Whitney, along with the seal and signature of the notary public, Margaret Thompson. Third, Katie had complete medical records showing she cared for me since I was 8. This included routine checkups, vaccinations, and treatments at Riverside Medical Center. Fourth, financial documentation proved that Katie had covered all expenses for raising me since 2003. This included food, clothing, school tuition, and medical costs. Every receipt and invoice was carefully saved. Fifth, she had letters and emails from my school confirming that she had been my legal guardian. She had attended all parent-teacher meetings, signed every vital document, and made all educational decisions on my behalf. Finally, Katie had family photos from 2003 to the present, showing me growing up in a loving and stable home, completely contradicting the image of a kidnapped child that Bruce and Whitney were trying to paint. After reviewing all the documents, Amelia looked up with a confident voice and said, "Tanner, we don't just have enough evidence to defend you. We can strike back hard. What they're doing could be considered defamation and damaging your reputation." While we were preparing our legal strategy, the story about my biological parents spread like wildfire on social media. Videos from Bruce and Whitney's press conference were uploaded across every platform. Public reaction quickly split into two distinct sides. One group believed Bruce and Whitney's narrative, leaving comments like, "No one has the right to take a child from their biological parents. This poor family searched for their son for 21 years. Katie Harper is a child abductor. Rich people always think they can do whatever they want." But many defended me and Katie, sharing views such as, "Why are they only showing up now? Something about this doesn't add up. Tanner Harper deserves happiness. They just want money." My social media accounts were flooded with thousands of comments, ranging from messages of support to harsh criticism. At that point, I had to turn off all comments to protect my mental health temporarily. Violet got pulled into the storm, too. She received hundreds of messages, some supportive, others attacking her for taking the side of a kidnapped man. At the same time, the fashion brands I was working with began to worry about the impact on their image. Mike Thompson worked around the clock to manage the situation. He scheduled interviews with major television networks, prepared press releases, and coordinated with the legal team to ensure the facts were communicated accurately. And in the middle of all that chaos, the thing that hurt me the most was seeing the comments about Katie. The woman who had saved me, who had loved me like her own son, was now being called a kidnapper and a criminal. 1 week after Bruce and Whitney's press conference, we held our own at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. The room was packed with reporters from major news outlets. I began with a calm but determined voice. Good afternoon to the press and everyone watching. My name is Tanner Harper. Today, I speak the truth about my life and the woman who saved me from a hellish childhood. Right after that, I presented the first piece of evidence. I held up a photocopy of the courier envelope. This is a copy of the envelope Whitney Dawson sent to Katie Harper on August 19, 2003. You can see her signature, the sender's address, and the tracking number. I passed the copy around for reporters to examine and verify the information. Next, I raised the custody relinquishment papers. These documents were signed and notarized by Bruce Dawson and Whitney Dawson on August 16, 2003, relinquishing their parental rights. There was no coercion, no deception. They gave me up voluntarily. Cameras clicking filled the room as journalists captured every image of the critical documents. Then Katie stood to speak. With a voice that was strong yet full of emotion, my mother said, "I didn't kidnap any child. I saw an 8-year-old boy who had been abandoned with a letter relinquishing custody. I couldn't turn my back on a child in need." Katie continued, "For 21 years, I have loved Tanner as my own. I've stood by him through everything, from the bullying he endured in school to the success he has achieved in his career. I do not regret my decision." After those words, the room fell completely silent. Even seasoned journalists who had covered countless scandals were visibly moved by the honesty and emotion in Katie's voice. After the truth was revealed with full supporting evidence, public opinion shifted completely within just a few hours. Bruce and Whitney immediately disappeared from all media platforms. Their attorney, Robert Stevens, withdrew from the case right after reviewing the documents we presented. He stated that he could not continue to represent a claim clearly without merit. Bruce and Whitney's social media accounts were bombarded with thousands of critical comments. They had to shut down all their profiles and vanished entirely from the internet. But I knew that wasn't the end. What they had done, trying to destroy my life and Katie's reputation with blatant lies, needed to carry legal consequences. 2 weeks after our press conference, Amelia Jones filed a lawsuit against Bruce Dawson and Whitney Dawson in New York County Court with 3 main charges. First, defamation and damage to reputation. Bruce and Whitney intentionally spread false information about Katie kidnapping me, which seriously harmed both my reputation and Katie's. Second, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Their actions caused unnecessary emotional suffering for both me and Katie through malicious and false accusations. Third, child abandonment, civil charge. While the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution had passed, we could still pursue a civil claim with clear evidence. We sought $5 million in damages and a permanent restraining order. At that point, Bruce and Whitney could not afford a strong legal defense. They had to rely on a public defender, a young man named David Park, who had just graduated from law school and was overwhelmed by the case's complexity. After 6 months of legal proceedings, the court ruled entirely in our favor. The final ruling was that Bruce and Whitney were to pay a total of $2.5 million in compensation, reduced from $5 million after negotiation. They were also issued a restraining order prohibiting contact with me and Katie for 10 years. They were also ordered to issue a public apology across major media outlets and pay all of our legal expenses. Unable to pay the massive settlement, Bruce and Whitney had to sell their $80,000 trailer home in Middletown. Whitney lost her part-time job at Dollar General after the scandal spread through the local community. Bruce couldn't find any new job, as anyone could Google his name and see the entire story. The Middletown community completely turned its back on them. The Baptist church they used to attend asked them to stop coming. While not banning them outright, the local grocery store saw staff and customers avoiding them altogether. Even extended family members cut ties. Whitney's brother, Tom Miller, publicly declared on Facebook, "I'm ashamed to have a sister like Whitney. My family has nothing to do with her anymore." After the legal storm settled about 8 months ago, I brought Katie and Violet to our new home in Stowe, Vermont. The dream house Katie had always wished for. The house has 5 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a stone fireplace, and, most importantly, a 2-acre lavender garden that Katie can tend to with her hands. On our first night in the new home, in that peaceful atmosphere, I asked Katie, "Mom, if you hadn't adopted me back then," immediately, before I could finish the sentence, Katie looked at me with eyes full of love and answered quickly, "My sweet boy, you were born to shine. I just helped you see it." After those words, I felt a calm settle over me, peace after everything we had been through. And today, I'm 29 years old, more successful than I ever dared to dream. The birthmark that once made Bruce and Whitney feel ashamed has now become a symbol of strength, overcoming adversity, and the beauty of diversity. Katie Harper, not Whitney Dawson, is my birth mother. She has shown that true family isn't defined by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and an unbreakable commitment to never give up on each other. Bruce and Whitney tried to take advantage of my success after abandoning me. Instead, they learned the hard way that karma never forgets an address. Violet and I are planning our wedding next spring in Katie's lavender garden. We're also talking about having children and creating a family built on love, not the illusion of physical perfection. And before I end this story, I want to share a message with anyone listening. If you've ever been rejected for how you look, for being different, for not fitting someone else's expectations, remember this: what gets you rejected today might be what the world admires in you tomorrow. A real family isn't made up of the people who gave you life. A real family comprises the people who choose to stay when the rest of the world walks away. They're the ones who love you unconditionally, the ones who believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. And if you're going through something similar right now, know this: you deserve love. You deserve happiness. And the people who truly matter will see the beauty in your true self. And if you were me, if your biological parents came back after 21 years, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about family, personal growth, and finding strength in adversity. Thank you for listening, and I wish you a day filled with love and happiness. Get out of the wedding. You have nothing to be proud of. That's what my mother screamed at me and my wife, right in the middle of my sister's wedding over a year ago. Even though I had paid $25,000 to cover the entire cost of that day, she still kicked us out. All because my wife wasn't dressed fancy enough and had embarrassed her. Surrounded by noise, judgmental stares, and a room full of people, I had 2 choices: quietly walk away so the wedding could go on smoothly, or stand up for the woman I love, no matter the consequences. I chose to stand up for her. Let me take you back to what really happened that day, and tell me this: was I wrong for choosing the woman who's always stood by me, over a family that no longer sees me as one of their own? Hello everyone, I'm Thomas, 32 years old, and currently the chief financial officer at a multinational corporation. I live a relatively quiet life and value independence and clarity in everything I do, including relationships. My wife, Violet, is 28 and works as an elementary school teacher. She doesn't come from a wealthy family, nor does she wear flashy clothes or live up to the kind of glamour people might expect. But I love her, for her sincerity, the way she sees the world with compassion, and the kindness she shows to children I once thought no one could have the patience for. We just got married 2 weeks ago. It was a small but warm ceremony at an upscale restaurant in the heart of the city. Most of my friends and relatives were there, and Violet was surrounded by the people who loved her. But there was one thing that kept the day from being truly complete. My parents weren't there. Not because they were busy, not because of distance or health issues. The truth is, I didn't invite them. And it all goes back to a conflict that happened a year ago at my sister Naomi's wedding. Naomi and I grew up in an ordinary household. My dad was an electrical engineer, and my mom worked an admin job at a local hospital. Life was never extravagant, but we never went without anything we truly needed. Naomi is 6 years younger than me, and ever since she was born, my parents' attitude toward me started to shift, gradually but noticeably, like a clock hand silently slipping out of alignment. I still remember clearly what it was like in those early years when I was their only child. Back then, every scraped knee had my mom in a panic. Every scribble drawing I made was treated like a masterpiece and proudly taped to the wall by my dad. I used to believe that kind of love would never change. Then Naomi came along. A tiny, fair-skinned baby girl with a sweet laugh. Someone people naturally wanted to hold. And just like that, everything seemed to shift. So quickly, I didn't even get the chance to ask why. I stopped being the subject of proud stories told to neighbors. I was no longer carried to bed when I stayed up late. Birthday presents became simpler, no longer filled with surprises like before. All the attention seemed to flow in a different direction. And strangely enough, I wasn't hurt by it, because I understood Naomi was my little sister. I always believed that if my parents' love could help her grow up happy, then it was okay for me to step back quietly. As I got older and entered my early years of high school, I began to see more clearly where I stood in the family. It wasn't just a vague feeling anymore. It was a noticeable difference in the way my parents treated me compared to my sister. The older Naomi got, the more charming and quick-witted she became, and she seemed to command all the attention in the house. My parents constantly reminded me to let her have her way, saying, "You're the older brother. You need to think ahead," or "Naomi's still little. She doesn't know any better." At first, those words sounded reasonable. But over time, as they repeated at the dinner table, during games, and even in moments that hardly mattered, they started leaving marks I didn't even recognize right away. I wasn't selfish, but I was a teenage boy, and the feeling of being pushed aside, even just a little, started to wear on me. There were moments when I truly felt jealous. I snapped when she was defended, even though she was the one at fault. I got frustrated when my mom made me give up my toys, my seat, or even my study time to watch over her. And at times, I hated my little sister. But the strange thing is, Naomi was also the one who made it impossible to hate her. I remember one time I was sketching a comic book character when she quietly sat down beside me, rested her chin in her hands, and whispered, "Thomas, you're the best person in the world." Then she hugged me and tucked herself into my chest like it was the safest place she knew. Another time, I overheard her bragging to her classmates, saying, "My brother can do everything. He's great at sports, he draws really well, and he never yells at me. He's my superhero." I stood frozen at the stairwell after hearing that, my heart softening in a way I didn't expect. Naomi wasn't the kind of spoiled kid who thought she deserved everything or took people for granted. She knew when to be quiet. She knew when to step back so I could breathe. Whenever I was down after being scolded by Mom, Naomi would quietly come over and slip a cookie into my hand or hand me a crooked little card with, "I'm sorry," scribbled in crayon. And in those quiet, thoughtful ways, she made me forget the resentment I once carried. Time passed and we grew up, each going our separate ways. After graduating college, I moved out on my own, slowly settling into a quiet, independent life and building my career. Naomi stayed behind, growing closer to our parents and, over time, naturally becoming the center of nearly every family decision, as if it had always been meant to be that way. We weren't as close as we'd been as kids, but we still kept in touch. Every few weeks, she'd call to check in, sometimes asking for feedback on a presentation to show off a cake she'd successfully baked. I always answered, always listened, always kept a comfortable distance, close enough to care but far enough to stay guarded. Then, one afternoon just over a year ago, I got a call from my father. I was at the office, wrapping up the last few reports of the day. His name flashed on my screen, and for some reason, I picked up right away, an instinct I didn't usually have with calls from home. His voice came through, short but urgent. "You should come home. There's something important." I asked what it was, but he didn't explain. He just repeated, "It's a family matter. The sooner, the better." I hung up, feeling a familiar heaviness. Not from worry, but from the weight I always seemed to carry whenever I was summoned home. It was the same feeling I'd had before, like I was being pulled into some unspoken expectation I wasn't sure I wanted to meet. That night, I returned to the old house. The same house I hadn't stepped into since Naomi's birthday 2 years ago. I went alone. Not because Violet didn't want to come, but because I didn't want to bring her back to a place that had once hurt her so deeply. At that birthday party, I brought Violet home with the simple intention of introducing the woman I loved to my parents. She was still a bit shy back then. She wore a modest dress and brought a box of homemade cookies as a gift for Naomi. After a few polite greetings, everything seemed fine, until my mother asked what Violet did for a living. The moment she heard Violet was a kindergarten teacher, she paused and nodded slowly, like she was confirming something she'd already made up in her mind. Midway through dinner, as the conversation drifted toward education and Violet's job, My mother suddenly spoke. She didn't look at anyone, but her voice was loud enough for the whole table to hear. Being a kindergarten teacher isn't a real profession. It's just paid babysitting. Her words dropped onto the table like a stone hitting a still lake. Violet froze. She didn't say a word. She just lowered her head and gave a faint smile. The kind you use when you're trying to hide how deeply something has cut you. I didn't respond right away. I looked at my mother, stood up, pulled out Violet's chair and said, quietly but loud enough for everyone to hear, "If you can't show Violet respect, then maybe we don't belong at this party." And just like that, we left. Violet hasn't set foot in that house since. And me, since that day, I haven't been the obedient son I once was. That shift alone was enough for my mother to start harboring even more resentment toward Violet, even though she never once said a disrespectful word to her. As I was still lost in my thoughts, the door suddenly swung open. It was my mother. She stood there with her arms crossed, eyes sweeping quickly from head to toe before landing on the space beside me. Her voice cut through the room, cold and sharp, like she'd been rehearsing it. "You didn't bring that girl with you. Good. I don't want to see her face." I looked up, kept my voice calm, and said slowly, word by word, "If you say that again, I won't ever come back to this house." She didn't respond, but her lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw something in her face that wasn't victory. It was hesitation. A few seconds later, my father stepped out of the kitchen. He wore an old sweater, his expression serious but not tense. His voice came short and clear. "Come in. We need to talk." I nodded and we walked into the living room. Dinner that evening wasn't just with my parents. Naomi was there too. As I stepped into the room, I saw her sitting on the sofa, hands clenched in her lap, eyes filled with nervous energy when she saw me. She gave me a slight nod but didn't say a word. My father sat across from me. He crossed his arms, leaned back, and looked at me directly, as if presenting something that had already been carefully discussed. He said, "Naomi's getting married. The ceremony is in a month. We're in the middle of planning." I nodded slightly. That didn't surprise me. I knew she had a boyfriend, and marriage seemed like a natural next step. Then his tone shifted and dropped a little deeper. "She's pregnant, 2 months along. Your mother and I want to get things done quickly and quietly. But the costs, well, they're hard to cover right now. Work's been rough lately, and Naomi's out of a job." He paused as if gauging my reaction, then continued, "We'd like your help, around $25,000. That'll cover the wedding dress, the reception, and the venue deposits." When he finished speaking, I leaned back in my seat and looked straight at Naomi. With my current job, $25,000 wasn't something I had to think long and hard about. But what made me pause was Naomi's silence. I asked her calmly, "You've been working for 3 years. You didn't manage to save anything?" She didn't answer. Her lips tightened. Her eyes shifted away from mine. That's when my mother jumped in, her voice protective and defensive. "She's been paying off student loans, rent, everyday expenses. Not everyone is as well off as you, Thomas." I didn't say anything right away. A few minutes passed in silence. No one pushed me, they knew I needed a moment. After thinking it through, I gave a slight nod. I didn't look at anyone as I spoke. I just kept my voice even. "Okay, I'll help." The whole room exhaled, like someone had just opened a window after holding their breath. But I wasn't done. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and looked directly at my father as I added, "I'm not giving anyone cash. I'll be the one signing the contracts with the venue. Every payment will go directly to the organizers. No middlemen. No handing money to family." At that, my father glanced at my mother. My mother glanced at Naomi. Naomi still didn't look at me. After a long pause, they agreed. A few days later, on a quiet weekend afternoon, I drove over to pick up Naomi. We had planned to visit the venue to finalize the booking and stop by a bridal shop to look at dresses. Everything went exactly as agreed. Every transaction was under my name. The contracts, the receipts, the payment confirmations, nothing slipped past my control. I'm not a suspicious person by nature, but I learned early on, when it came to my parents, money rarely ended up where it was supposed to, unless I was the one steering the wheel. I used to believe helping family was simply the right thing to do, until one incident changed that. It was a few years back. My mom called me mid-month, saying my dad urgently needed $2,000 for a medical checkup. I didn't ask questions. That same night, I wired the money. 3 days later, I stopped by their house unannounced. On the dining table was a brand new cold-pressed juicer, a still-packaged golf set, and a brochure for a discounted vacation to Florida, while my mom excitedly chatted with the neighbors over coffee. From that moment on, I stopped trusting them with money, and I never sent another dollar without knowing exactly where it was going. After I finished paying for everything, from the venue deposit to the wedding dress, and saw the joy in Naomi's eyes, I knew I had done the right thing. She stepped out of the boutique, glowing, clutching the carefully wrapped white dress in her arms, unable to hide her excitement. As we stood by the car, she turned to thank me. It's the same gentle voice, the same look of quiet gratitude I'd always known. That's how Naomi's always been. Thoughtful, grounded, never taking what I did for granted. That evening, driving home through the city lights with soft jazz playing in the background, I let myself believe. Maybe things were finally getting better. After everything, after footing nearly the entire bill for her wedding, after choosing not to bring up the past or hold on to grudges, maybe my parents would begin to see me differently. Not as the cold, distant son. Not just the brother who kept to himself, but as part of this family, truly. But then, 3 days before the wedding, my mother reminded me exactly why I should never let my guard down with her. That day, I was at the office, pouring a cup of coffee, when her name lit up my phone screen. The moment I picked up, her voice came through, sharp and commanding, like she was reading from a script. "The wedding's in 3 days. You'll come alone. Don't bring that girl. That girl. Not your girlfriend. Not Violet. Just that girl. Violet. The woman who had stood by me through every storm, who had faced life's trials with me without ever once asking for more than respect." In my mother's eyes, she was nothing more than that girl. I stood by the window, the paper cup warming my hand like a warning. I asked quietly, "Why?" My mother didn't even pause. It was like she'd been waiting for the question. "She's an embarrassment to the family. It's not just her job as a teacher. It's how she dresses. Plain, unrefined. One look, and you can tell she's not on our level." I closed my eyes, and in that moment, something inside me, something long suppressed, began to harden. I took a slow breath and answered, each word deliberate, firm, not raised in anger, but heavy enough to end the conversation. "That's enough. I don't want to hear anymore. And if you keep this up, I won't be seeing you again." Then I hung up. And in that exact moment, I knew one thing with complete clarity. This wedding would not be the simple family affair I had once hoped for. On Naomi's wedding day, everything was set. As I buttoned the last clasp on my vest, Violet stepped out from the dressing room. Her light blue dress hugged her frame with soft elegance. Modest, graceful, exactly who she was. She walked over and adjusted my collar in silence. Then she paused, hesitated, and looked up at me. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, like she was afraid saying it aloud might shatter something fragile between us. "Maybe you should go alone." I froze, holding her gaze. "What did you just say?" I asked softly but clearly. She didn't look away, but I noticed her hands tightening around each other in front of her dress. "I just think maybe it would be better if I didn't go," she said slowly. "Your family, they won't be happy to see me there." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped closer, wrapped my arms around her, and gently pulled her into my chest. My voice dropped low but firm. "Don't worry, I'm here, and I'll protect you." About an hour later, we left the house and arrived at the venue earlier than most guests. As the bride's brother, I wanted to be there ahead of time, to see Naomi in her dress, to make sure that at least part of this day would carry absolute joy. But just as we walked into the reception hall, my mother, standing near the welcome table, chatting with some relatives, turned and spotted us. She froze. Her smiling face dropped instantly. She didn't say a word at first. They just stared at me, then gave Violet a long, unmistakably disapproving glance. Then she began walking toward us. Each step of her heels echoed like a warning knock on a door no one wanted to answer. No smile, no greeting. She tilted her head toward me, voice low, clipped, and full of command. "Come with me, both of you." Without hesitation, I turned to Violet, gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, and followed my mother. The moment the three of us stopped in the hallway behind the reception hall, my mother spun around. She stood tall, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her sharp eyes flicking past me before landing squarely on Violet. Her voice came out low but tight with restraint. "Do you not understand plain language, Thomas? I told you not to bring her. I knew then this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. I straightened up, shifted slightly in front of Violet, half shielding her, and tried to keep my voice calm. This is Naomi's wedding. I'm her brother. Violet is my fiancée. Her being here is completely appropriate. My mother narrowed her eyes, then let out a short, bitter laugh. Her words dripped with sarcasm. Fiancée? A girl who teaches kindergarten? I've held my tongue, Thomas. But today is a big day. I won't have people whispering behind our backs just because you brought someone so plain, so cheap-looking. At that, Violet squeezed my hand tighter. Her hand had gone cold, but it didn't shake. She said nothing, and somehow, that silence hurt me more than if she had cried. I turned to my mother, lowered my voice, but let each word land like a stone. I don't care what people think, but I do care about the way you're treating the woman I love. She let out a longer laugh this time, cold and bitter like frost breaking glass. The woman you love? Let me ask you this. Are you trying to play the hero? Do you think dropping $25,000 gives you the right to do whatever you want? I took a deep breath, still holding Violet's hand, steadying myself, grounding myself in her. My voice stayed even but firm. I've never once brought up that money and never used it to ask for anything. But since you mentioned it, yes, I think I deserve a little respect. At the very least, not to be treated like an outsider when I'm the one who signed every single contract for this entire event. My words must have struck a nerve. Her pride flared, and her voice rose to a near scream. You think you should be proud of that 25 grand? And then, in one of those moments I'll never forget, in a cold, narrow hallway with no one to witness it, no eyes watching but ours, she shouted, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "Get out of the wedding! You have nothing to be proud of." The words rang out like a slap with no hand. They echoed off the walls, then echoed again inside my chest. After my mother said those words, I stood still for a moment, breathing in slowly, like I needed that breath to hold back the wave rising inside my chest. Then I looked at her, and with a calm, steady voice, low, but clear enough that not a single word would be missed, I said, "All right, if that's how you feel, then I have nothing left to stay for." I gripped Violet's hand tightly, turned around, and walked straight out of that hallway, toward the reception area, the very room where, a month ago, I had signed the wedding contract myself and wired the full payment in advance. At the front desk, I asked to speak with the venue manager. My tone stayed calm as I explained my request and referenced the terms in our agreement, adding a few specific instructions. A few minutes later, the manager politely stepped out with me and Violet. Together, we walked toward the center of the hall, where my parents and Naomi stood with a small group of relatives. His voice rang out clearly across the room. Apologies, but as requested by Mr. Thomas, the contract holder, we will begin closing down the event space in 20 minutes. Our staff will assist guests in leaving the premises shortly after. The room went dead silent. My father's eyes widened in disbelief. My mother's face turned red with rage. They rushed toward me. My father barked, voice trembling with fury. "Have you lost your mind, Thomas? You're really going to ruin your sister's big day." Then my mother, seemingly forgetting the cruel words she had just hurled at me, shouted, "Who do you think you are? Canceling everything. What are you trying to prove?" I didn't respond to their anger. I looked them both in the eye and said, my voice low but unwavering, "If you can't show respect to the woman I'm going to marry, then I have no reason to pay for your celebration." That sentence cut through the air. The room froze. Then, just as quickly, their tone shifted. My father's voice dropped, and his gaze slipped to the side. My mother's posture softened, and her expression changed, like regret had finally crept in. My dad spoke first, quieter now, almost pleading. "If you do this, how are we supposed to face our relatives?" Then my mother stepped forward, for the first time all day, meeting my eyes not with anger but something closer to apology. "Please, don't do this. I know I was wrong earlier." But even as they lowered their voices, I held mine steady. Not angry, not emotional, just firm. "All right," I said. "If you agree this is a loan, then I'll let the event continue." My father stiffened. His voice rose again, offended. "A loan? You'd force your parents to sign a loan agreement?" I shook my head, eyes locked on his. "No, you forced this, not me." And in the end they agreed, because they knew, if they pushed me any further, once the groom's family and the rest of the guests arrived, It wouldn't be me who looked bad. It would be them. Moments later, under the watchful eyes of the restaurant manager and the security cameras in the reception room, a loan agreement was drafted. The terms were laid out clearly, and my parents, in their elegant clothes on what should have been their proudest day, signed it like they were swallowing something far more bitter than failure. Once the paperwork was complete, I took Violet's hand and walked out of that wedding. No goodbyes, no second glance. Behind me, I heard Naomi calling for me to stay, but I didn't stop walking. Not because I didn't love my sister, but because I knew, if I didn't walk away that day, I might never retake another step for myself. After that party, I never saw them again. No calls, no texts, not even a word from our parents. I handed everything related to the $25,000 over to my lawyer. I didn't want any more conversations. I just wanted clarity. But then, about a month after the wedding, on a Saturday afternoon, I had just gotten back to my apartment after a long morning meeting when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Naomi and her husband. I opened the door, didn't say a word. I just quietly stepped aside to let them in. Naomi sat on the couch like she was carrying a heavy weight on her chest. Her hand gently rested on her belly. It wasn't that noticeable yet, but I knew. The baby was there. After a moment, Naomi was the one who spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. We came to return the money. She opened her bag, pulled out a stack of cash, and placed it on the table. I looked at it, then looked at Naomi. Her eyes dropped. She pressed her lips together, like she was trying to hold back tears, and slowly began to speak. After that day, Mom and Dad blamed me. They said I had to take responsibility because I was the one who accepted the money. But you know what? For years now, I've been paying all their electricity bills, water bills, and even their medication. I never told anyone because I thought that's just what kids are supposed to do. So when you asked why I didn't have any savings, it's because all my money went to them. I didn't respond. I just looked at her. The little sister I had always thought was more loved, more protected, and had it easier than me. But that day I saw a different Naomi. A Naomi who was holding herself together to carry everything, just like I once did. In my head, two opposing thoughts twisted around each other. Part of me, hardened and wary, believed our parents had figured out how much I cared about Naomi and were using that. Maybe they were the ones who sent her, hoping those grateful eyes would melt my resolve once again. But the other part of me, the part that still remembered how Naomi used to proudly tell her friends, "My brother Thomas is the best person in the world." That part believed she was telling the truth. After a few minutes of silence, I let out a sigh, then gently pushed the stack of cash back toward her. Naomi looked up, her eyes brimming with tears, surprised. I looked her straight in the eye and said slowly, "This money, it's not for you." I paused, my gaze shifting briefly to her belly, and continued, "This money is for the baby you're carrying." Right at that moment, Naomi broke down in tears, no longer holding anything back. She covered her face, trembling. And me, I just sat there, didn't say a word, just let her cry. There are things in life that don't need to be taken back. Some debts, when paid with love, leave no one owing. And some tears, when they fall, are enough to mend what's been broken. I don't remember exactly how long Naomi stayed after that. I remember that the whole time, she didn't say another word. She just sat there, hands wrapped gently around her belly, tears occasionally slipping from her eyes. Quiet, like someone who had finally laid down a burden she'd carried for far too long. When she stood up to leave, Naomi took my hand. For the first time in years, that grip didn't carry guilt or a thank you. Carried understanding. Not the kind between a big brother and a little sister who had once been favored, but between two people who had grown up in the same house, where neither of us ever really felt fully loved. About 2 months later, I got a message from Naomi. It was a photo of an ultrasound. Below it, just 3 words, "Thank you, my brother." I stared at the screen for a long time. In that image was a tiny, blurry shape still undefined. But I knew, I had just sent something good out into that little one's life. Not through money, but through something I once wished I had when I was a child. A quiet kind of protection, given without conditions. Since then, Naomi and I have started talking more. Not all the time, no expectations, but just enough for me to know that even if my relationship with our parents has cracked with Naomi, there's still a part of the family I can come home to. As for my parents, about 3 months after Naomi's wedding, they suddenly showed up at my door one weekend afternoon. No warning, no call ahead, Just the sound of the doorbell right as I was about to make 2 cups of coffee for Violet and me. I opened the door and saw them standing there, dressed neatly, their faces no longer tense like the last time we met. My mother smiled faintly as if nothing from the past had ever happened. My father glanced around the apartment like he was weighing whether or not to sit down. A few minutes later, after some awkward small talk, they got to the point. It was my father who spoke, his voice calm and direct. We're planning to open a restaurant with an old friend. We need around 50,000. Can you help? I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even upset. I just looked at them and answered in an even tone. I'm not saying no, but this time I need collateral. Specifically, the house you're living in. That sentence changed my mother's expression. She looked up at me, lips tight like she was about to say something, but then gave a small laugh, pretending to stay composed. Thomas, we're your parents. If you can't help, it's fine. But why make us sign loan papers like strangers? I leaned back in my chair, eyes still on them, and replied with a steady voice. Not harsh, just as cold as the truth. From the day you told me to get out of the wedding, there hasn't been any us anymore. No one said anything after that. No explanations. No apologies. No arguments. They just stood up, their polite act quickly fading, and walked out the door like they'd never been there. Since that day, they've completely disappeared from my life. No more texts. No more calls. Not a single word. And I haven't looked for them either. Because some relationships, once they're cut, hurt less the quieter they stay. And then, 2 months ago, on a quiet afternoon, I officially proposed to Violet after nearly 4 years together. She froze for a few seconds when I asked, but then smiled. Tears shimmered at the corners of her eyes as she nodded. She said yes, gently, without hesitation, like she had known the question was coming and had been waiting for it for a long time. A few days later, as we started going over the guest list, Violet hesitantly asked me, "Have you thought about inviting your parents?" I stayed quiet for a moment, not out of anger, but because I wanted her to understand. I don't allow anyone who's ever hurt you to be at our wedding. Violet didn't say anything more. She just nodded. But I knew that nod wasn't agreement, and it wasn't resignation. It was respect. She understood and didn't try to change me, because real love isn't about convincing someone to forgive. It's about learning how to move forward together when both of you still carry your scars. And now, we're simply enjoying our moments of happiness. In a small apartment with a sunny balcony, morning coffee made together, quiet evenings cooking dinner, playing soft music, and talking about the most ordinary things. There's no longer anyone around who treats love like a bargaining chip. No one left, forcing me to choose between family and self-respect. Just the two of us, 2 people, 2 pasts, but one shared future. And if there's one lesson I've taken from everything that's happened, it's this: family isn't always a safe place. And not everyone tied to you by blood deserves a place in the most sacred moments of your life. There are boundaries, once crossed. Forgiveness is no longer an obligation. Some wounds don't need to be explained, only protected. And there are people, no matter how much you once loved them, if they never learn to value you, then walking away isn't cruel. It's growth. Always stand with the one who stood by you when no one else did. Because sometimes, the most essential thing to protect isn't the harmony of a toxic family. It's the peace in the home you're building. And before I wrap up today's story, I want to ask you, those of you who've stayed with me until the very last moments, was I wrong for deciding not to invite my parents to my wedding? Was I wrong for asking them to sign a loan agreement at my sister's wedding, just because I no longer wanted my kindness to be taken for granted? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to know, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? And if this story made you pause, it touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share it with someone you think might need this perspective too. Thank you for listening. See you again in the following story. Three days before Christmas, my dad sent me a single text: "You're a disgrace. Don't show up at Grandpa's Christmas dinner." It's all because of a joke I made about getting fired. I thought at the very least they would support me. But no. The moment they found out I had lost my job in London, they also realized they wouldn't be getting any more money from me. That's when they turned their backs. From that moment on, I understood one thing very clearly. If I didn't stand up for myself, no one would ever give me anything back. So, I decided to take back everything that once belonged to me. Not because I needed it, but because I deserved to have it. Follow my story and tell me, was I wrong for my choices? Hello everyone, I'm Ellis, 30 years old, a regional branch director at a logistics company specializing in frozen food distribution in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 6 months ago, I completed a 2-year assignment in London and returned to the States. I used to think that after all those years of being away, a returning child would be welcomed with open arms, or at the very least a warm family dinner. But the reality turned out to be colder than a British winter. Just a few days after I got back, I was hit with a painful realization that I had never dared to consider in the past 30 years. In their eyes, I wasn't family. I was an ATM, and like any other machine, they didn't hesitate to toss me out like broken junk once I stopped producing. I grew up in a typical working-class American family. We weren't poor, but we never had enough to live comfortably. My dad, Damien, was a foreman for a local construction company. He was the kind of man who believed that a real man had to be tough, handle everything on his own, and never show weakness in front of others. At home, his word was always the loudest and final. He didn't need to yell. Just one firm sentence from him was enough to clarify that no one should argue. My mom, Skylar, worked at the public library. She was gentle and kind and always tried to keep the peace in the house, even if that meant staying quiet when she probably should have spoken up. She spent her whole life in a small town and never considered leaving. I also have a younger sister named Brooklyn, 2 years my junior. After her divorce, she moved back in with our parents and has been raising her child independently. Brooklyn doesn't have a steady job, but to our parents, she always needs to be cared for. I'm not. In their eyes, I'm the one who's already settled. So I don't need attention, don't need to be asked how I'm doing, and most importantly, I'm not allowed to complain. Every burden left in the house, big or small, was silently expected to land on me. When we were kids, things at home felt pretty fair. Brooklyn and I were treated the same, no one was favored. Mom always divided everything equally, from meals and clothes to allowance. Dad always said, if you're family, you have to be fair. But that started to change the summer I turned 28, when I got nominated to lead our company's London branch for 2 years temporarily. The day I shared the good news with my family, Mom called me, her voice full of pride. She said, your dad is so proud of you. Everyone in the family is happy for you. I thought it would stop at that pride. But less than 2 weeks after I landed in London, Mom texted, can you front us $600 to fix the heater? This winter's going to be cold. I'll send it back next month. I was earning well from that long assignment, so I didn't think twice. I immediately wired the money. 3 weeks later, a message from Dad came in. Brooklyn's behind on her car insurance. Can you cover her for now? She promised to pay you back when she gets her paycheck next month. Once again, I quietly transferred the money. And then it happened again. And again. Each time I said nothing and just sent the money. There were times I tried to bring it up gently. Once, when Mom called to ask if I could send a few hundred more for Brooklyn's hospital bills for her kid, I softly said, I'm tight right now. You remember the other times. No one's paid me back yet. There was a pause on the other end. Then she let out a sigh, her voice tinged with disappointment. She said, well, if it's such a burden, never mind. I don't want to bother you. She didn't speak to me for a few days after that. And like always, I sent the money to make things right again. Another time, I told Dad that living expenses here were going up, and the exchange rate meant I wasn't saving like before. He went quiet momentarily, then dropped a line in his usual blunt way. We raised you for over 20 years and never kept track. Now we need a few hundred, and it's suddenly a problem. I didn't answer. I knew any response would become an argument, leaving me feeling like the bad guy. And just like every other time, I opened my banking app and made the transfer. They ended the call the same way they always did. Thanks. We're still so proud of you. During my time in London, my grandfather was the only person in my family who kept in touch without asking for anything. He called me a few times each month. The calls were usually short, just a few minutes, and his voice was always calm and steady, just like the slow rhythm of life in the quiet suburb where he'd spent his whole life. Even though I never said much about what I was carrying, he could still sense the weight on my shoulders. Maybe it was his life experience or something he picked up in my voice, the kind of understanding that comes from someone who's lived long enough with sorrow to recognize the sound of someone trying to hide their exhaustion. I remember one call near the end of the year when he asked, Your parents are making you carry everything at home, aren't they? I didn't say much. I just answered softly, I can handle it, Grandpa. Don't worry about me. He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the ticking of his wall clock in the background before he finally said, slowly, family should help each other, but helping doesn't mean you have to carry it all. After that call ended, I sat there, staring out into the night beyond the glass window. I didn't feel sad, and I wasn't angry. I felt empty, like someone had touched a spot I didn't even realize was hurting. I said nothing but stayed in the living room for a long while. For the first time in years, someone in the family had asked me how I was feeling, not how much I could still send. Then, after a year and a half working in London, I got an email from the company saying I was being reassigned back to the US. They had found a replacement, and my term ended 6 months earlier than expected. During my time in London, I hadn't been home once. Not because plane tickets were expensive, but because the workload was so intense. There were weeks I worked straight through the weekend without a single day off. Still, I never complained to anyone in my family. I saw it as part of my responsibility when I accepted the position. When I saw the words "return assignment" confirmed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Part of it was the relief of finishing ahead of schedule. It'd be a significant plus in my year-end evaluation. But more than that, it was the feeling of finally going home. Back to the place where someone still called me every month to ask, "Are you eating okay over there?" That same evening, my grandfather was the first person I called to share the good news. Because of the time difference, it was nearly 7 p.m. where I was, and he had just finished lunch. He picked up almost immediately. As soon as I said, "I'm coming home this month," he let out a clear laugh and said, "Glad you'll make it in time for Christmas. The whole family's going to be happy." I paused for a second, then half-jokingly said, "Actually, I got fired. That's why I'm coming back early." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then came his voice again, steady and sure. He said, "That's all right. You did great while you were there. Getting fired doesn't mean you failed. Maybe it's just a reason for you to get some proper rest finally." After he said that, I went quiet. I didn't expect him to respond that way, so calmly, with not even a hint of disappointment in his voice. A few seconds later, he continued, "Don't overthink it. Just come home, then find another job. Not many people get sent to London for work like you did, so you'll land something else soon enough." That's when I told him the truth. I wasn't fired. I had been reassigned and was coming home early. When he realized I was being honest, his tone changed instantly. He said, "You're not messing with me. If that's the truth, then I'm happy for you." We chatted for a bit longer before I said goodbye and hung up. After that call with my grandfather, I only wanted to go home right then, not wait for the flight a week later, not deal with the handover. I just wanted to be back. After the call with my grandfather, I shared the news with my parents and sister. But this time, I didn't call anyone. Instead, I just dropped a short message in the family group chat. "I just got fired. I'll be home in a week. See you all at the house." When I sent that, I thought they'd respond like Grandpa did. Maybe with some encouragement, a quick check-in, or at the very least, a simple "it's okay, just come home." Deep down, I still believed that no matter the distance between us, they were still my family, and family doesn't turn its back on you when things go south. But just a few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Dad. I barely had time to answer before his voice came through. Sharp, cold, and nothing like I had hoped for. He said, "It's a disgrace to have a son who got fired. You've embarrassed me in front of the whole family, the neighbors. Don't bother showing your face around here." And then he hung up. They didn't let me say a word, just that long, broken tone of the call ending. After that, I sat still, staring at my phone screen. My first feeling wasn't anger, it was disappointment. It was like I had placed my trust in a door, only to watch it slam shut in my face without warning or explanation. I kept telling myself maybe he was just shocked. Perhaps it was just a burst of anger. I didn't blame him. I still believed that once I got home, things would be different. That he'd cool down. That he'd come to the door to let me in. As for my mom in Brooklyn, they said nothing. The message was still there in the chat. I saw the read notification next to both their names, but neither of them responded. And a week later, 3 days before Christmas that year, I landed back in Philadelphia after more than 7 hours on a plane. It was just getting dark when we touched down. Before the flight, I'd sent a message in the family group chat, "I'm coming home today." No one responded. Still, I held on to the hope that someone would be at the airport waiting for me. But I was wrong. When I walked out of baggage claim, no one held a sign with my name. No excited voices calling out. No hug. My phone didn't show a single missed call. I wheeled my suitcase toward the exit and called a cab. The driver asked where I was headed. I gave him my parents' address. Initially, I was supposed to stay in London for the full 2 years, so my apartment had been sublet through a broker. The lease wouldn't be up for another 3 months. I couldn't go back there yet, and honestly, there was no rush. I just needed a place to crash for a few days, get through Christmas and New Year's, then figure out a short-term rental until I could return to my place. The cab soon pulled up in front of my parents' house. For a second, I felt relief when I saw the lights on inside. It meant someone was home. I paid the driver, dragged my suitcase up the steps, and knocked on the door. A moment later, I heard footsteps. It was my dad. He looked me up and down, then asked flatly, "You came back?" Caught off guard, I nodded and tried to keep my voice steady. I hope to stay here for a few days until the new year. My apartment's still rented out, and the lease isn't up yet. Without lowering his voice, he shot back, "I don't want a failure in this house. What am I supposed to tell the neighbors? That my son got fired and came crawling back?" Before I could explain that it was all a joke, that I wasn't fired, he cut me off with a sentence colder than the winter air that night. "Get out. There's no place for someone like you here." Then he closed the door. Not forcefully, but firm enough that I understood. I wasn't welcome. My phone started buzzing as I stood outside my parents' house, unsure where to go next. It was Grandpa calling. I picked up immediately. After I gave him a quick rundown of what had just happened, he said only one thing: "Call a cab and come here. Stay with me for now." Right after that, I opened the app and booked another ride. Then I just stood there, watching the road. The glow from the streetlights spilled onto the sidewalk, and for a moment, I felt small. Nearly 30 minutes later, the car pulled up in front of the old house at the end of the block. Grandpa's place looked almost exactly like the last time I'd seen it. Low roof, sun, rain-faded wooden door, and worn-out porch step. When I arrived, he was already standing by the door, bundled up in a warm coat, hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything immediately when he saw me leave the car. He just looked at me momentarily, then said, "Come in, it's cold." I wheeled my suitcase inside. The door opened to the familiar scent of old wood, soft yellow light, and the gentle warmth inside the house. It was just enough to remind me that I was welcome here. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't mention what happened earlier at my parents' place. Instead, he grabbed an extra blanket, set up the living room for me, and told me to shower warmly. Dinner that night was simple, just some hot soup and bread, but it was the first meal in months I hadn't had to rush through during a work break or eat alone in a rented apartment. The house was mostly quiet, just the ticking of the wall clock, the faint clink of spoons against bowls, and a few casual questions about London's weather or how the heater in his place was making more noise this year. I didn't say much and he didn't push, but I did not feel like a burden for the rest of the evening. Around 10 that night, while I was lying in bed trying to adjust to the time zone and the biting cold of the winter I grew up with, my phone buzzed with a message from the family group chat. I sat up almost instantly. There was still a flicker of hope in me. Maybe Mom was asking where I was, or maybe Brooklyn had sent a message that sounded even remotely like concern. But what I saw was a short, cold message from Dad. "You're a disgrace. Don't show up at Grandpa's Christmas dinner." He had tagged me directly in the group. I sat up straight. I kept rereading the message, and each time, I felt that same burn in my chest, like someone had dragged a blade of ice down my spine. Then I replied, "You don't have the right to tell me not to go to Grandpa's." Less than a minute later, Mom responded, "I think you should respect your father's wishes. That dinner isn't for someone who's made everything so complicated." Then Brooklyn chimed in, too, siding with them. "Dad already said it. If you have any self-respect left, you should know not to show up." I stared at those messages as they popped up, each colder than the last. No one asked where I was. No one asked if I was okay after being turned away. They didn't care. All they wanted was for me to stay away from the dinner, to keep out of a space they decided I no longer deserved to be part of. After that message, I didn't reply. I set my phone aside and lay still in the dark, my mind spinning with 100 questions I couldn't answer. Why were they treating me like this? How could one message be all it took for them to cut me out of the family dinner, to treat me like a stranger or worse, a burden? That night, I couldn't sleep. In the long, heavy silence of the room, my thoughts drifted back to the past. I remembered how, as a kid, Every holiday meant Mom making traditional treats, Dad stringing up lights in the yard, and Brooklyn and me cutting paper decorations to tape on the windows. Back then, I didn't have to try to be loved. Just showing up was enough. Even in the early years after college, when I barely made ends meet, I was still welcomed whenever I came home. My parents always kept a seat for me at the dinner table. They'd tell the neighbors, "Our oldest son's back." Mom would remind Brooklyn to give up her room so her brother could sleep comfortably. And then it hit me. Everything had started to change after Brooklyn's divorce. I remembered that time so clearly. She moved back in with our parents, bringing her little kid. It was right around the time I received my 2-year assignment in London. From that point on, the calls slowly shifted. They became less about how I was doing and more about what I could send. Money for the power bill, car repairs, and preschool fees. A few $100s each time, but no one ever talked about paying me back. After everything I had done, I never expected that, in their eyes, I'd become something to be ashamed of, someone they wanted to hide. Someone wanted to be banned from dinner at his own grandfather's house. And that night, lying there wide awake, I decided I wouldn't stay silent anymore. If they would call me the disgrace of the family, I wouldn't keep holding back the kindness I had always offered them. I would take back everything I had supported them with over the past 2 years. 3 days later, the Christmas dinner was held at Grandpa's house. The weather was cold but sunny, and I looked forward to a family gathering for the first time in what felt like forever. I just missed the feeling. Being in a room full of people, hearing laughter and conversation, smelling food drifting from the kitchen, and answering small talk questions, even if they were just for show. Around 5 in the evening, relatives began to arrive. Everyone seemed surprised to see me, but they were warm and happy. Handshakes, smiles, questions. Some asked about work. Others said, "When did you get back? You didn't say anything." I smiled and replied to each one, keeping it simple. I just told them I came home a bit earlier than planned. Deep down, I believed that no matter what had happened, today was still about family. That warmth lasted until about 5:30. That's when my parents walked in with Brooklyn and her daughter. The second Dad saw me at Grandpa's house, his face changed completely. Without caring about the relatives or the man who owned the house, his voice cut through the room. "You failure. I told you not to come." I stood up, looked him straight, and answered, "You don't have the right. This is Grandpa's house." His face turned red, his voice tightening. "Get out. Don't stay here and make me more ashamed." I let out a quiet laugh, then said, voice sharp with sarcasm, "Ashamed of what? That I got fired? Or that you, Mom, and Brooklyn lived off my money for the past 2 years?" That line hit the room like a blade. Dad lunged toward me, clearly forgetting everyone else was there. Thankfully, a few uncles and cousins jumped in. One held me back, and another stopped him where he stood. At that moment, Grandpa, seated at the head of the table, put down his fork and slowly stood up. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut clear through the chaos. "Ellis, tell everyone everything. This is my house. No one touches my grandson." I turned to him, met his eyes, and nodded. And right there, in front of everyone, I told the whole story, from how my work in London had turned into a non-stop stream of financial favors, to the joke I made about getting fired, to the night I came back and was thrown out of the house, and finally, the message I got 3 days before Christmas. "You're a disgrace. Don't show up at Grandpa's Christmas dinner." I didn't just say it, I showed it. I pulled out my phone, opened the group chat, and passed it to Grandpa and the relatives closest to me. Then, I opened my banking app and scrolled through the transactions. Names: Brooklyn, Skylar. No one spoke for a few minutes. They just stared, quietly passing the phone around, like they were handling something too heavy to believe. Then, the first person to speak was Grandpa. He didn't turn to my parents. He looked straight at me, voice low but firm. "You kept something like this from me?" I looked at him, my eyes stinging slightly, but my voice stayed even. "I didn't want you to worry about me." And that broke the silence. Uncle Gabriel was the first to speak up, shaking his head as he looked at my dad. "Damien, how could you do that? If he was fired, you should have been the first one to welcome him home." Aunt Riley turned to my mom, anger and disbelief in her eyes. "Skylar, tell me the truth. Ellis isn't your son, is he? Because no real mother would ever treat her child like that." Then Lydia, my cousin, looked straight at Brooklyn. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word landed. "You lived off him for 2 years, and now you bite the hand that's been feeding your child." I don't remember everything that came after. There were too many voices, Too many heads shaking in disbelief. Too many words flying across the room like sparks. Dad sat down and buried his face in his hands. Mom turned away, shielding half her face. Brooklyn said nothing, just pulled her daughter close, holding her tight while silent tears fell onto the little girl's hair. About 10 minutes later, the room finally began to settle. The murmurs faded. No one spoke. Everyone just sat still, like they were waiting for someone, the elder of the house, to speak. Then Grandpa stood up. He didn't look at my parents right away. Instead, he glanced around the table, ensuring every pair of eyes was on him. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady and unmistakably firm. I want Damien, Skylar, and Brooklyn to apologize to Ellis. And I want you to pay back every dollar you borrowed from him over the past 2 years. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared at him, stunned, saying nothing for the first few seconds. My mother lifted a hand to her mouth, like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. As for me, I had to swallow a deep breath because if I didn't, I would have started crying right there at the table. Someone in my family had stood up for me for the first time, clearly, publicly, and without hesitation. A few moments later, my father broke the silence. He shouted, his voice a mix of anger and helplessness. He's my son. You can't make me apologize to him. And the money, he makes good money. Helping family a little. What's wrong with that? Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He just looked straight at him, eyes steady, and replied in a tone colder than any yelling could have been. If you wanted his help, the least you could have done was respect him. And another thing, he never asked to be born. Don't go having children and raising them to turn around and demand they provide for you. After that, my dad fell silent. Completely. It was as if something had been drained out of him. A few relatives nearby nodded in quiet agreement. A moment later, Grandpa spoke again. His voice was softer now, but it was clear this decision had been carefully made. I don't think you, your wife, or Brooklyn should stay for this dinner. I'm asking the 3 of you to leave my house. As my dad opened his mouth to say something, Grandpa raised his hand to stop him. No one dared to interrupt. Then, slowly but unmistakably, my father turned away from the table. My mother followed behind him, eyes down, not looking at anyone. Brooklyn said nothing, quietly picked up her daughter and held her close as she followed them out. The 3 of them walked out of the house, leaving a silence thicker than any judgment and a room full of people who didn't just witness what had happened, but would remember it. 5 minutes after they left the house, the dinner resumed. No one spoke about what had just happened. There was no whispering, no side conversations. Everyone quietly returned to the table, continued passing dishes, and poured more tea and wine. The air still carried a faint heaviness, but no one let it ruin the evening. They carried on, not to forget but to move forward. At the end of the night, as guests began saying their goodbyes, Grandpa came over to me. He didn't hug me. He didn't put a hand on my shoulder. He just looked at me for a long moment, then said slowly, "I'll make this right for you." I gave him a slight nod, returning his look with quiet gratitude. But honestly, I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed he was trying to comfort me, a way to close the night gently. But 2 days later, I realized he meant every word. 2 days later, in the evening, Grandpa called all the grandchildren back to the house. But that night didn't feel like a family gathering. It felt formal, like an announcement was coming. I arrived on time just like he'd asked. My parents were there too, along with Brooklyn. She sat near the back, holding her daughter in her lap. My mother didn't say a word when she stepped into the room. My father sat with his arms crossed, leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Around 7 o'clock, Grandpa explained that the meeting was to update his will, and to make everything official. Wesley, his lawyer, was also present, sitting nearby with a folder in his lap. Once the room quieted, Grandpa spoke. In the past, I divided my estate equally between the 3 families, including Damien and Skylar's. He paused after that, letting the weight of his words settle into the silence. Then he turned to look directly at my parents and said, "Starting today, the entire portion meant for Damien and Skylar will go to Ellis." The room held its breath. My father shot to his feet and shouted, "What are you saying? Why would you give my inheritance to Ellis?" Grandpa answered slowly, without raising his voice. "Because you're no longer someone I trust. You've lost that by lacking basic decency." My mother, unable to stay composed, spoke up in a shaky voice. "He just said something out of anger. Does it have to go this far?" To that, Grandpa shook his head and replied, calm but firm, "Skylar, It wasn't just words. He threw his son out of the house, the same son who sent money to keep that roof over your heads. And you stood by and said nothing. After that, no one else spoke. The room fell into a more profound silence. Some relatives nodded subtly, but no one challenged Grandpa's decision. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected any reward. I just stood there, heart pounding, doing my best to stay calm and not say anything that might break my respect for the man in front of me. Then Wesley, the lawyer, opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. He said, "I've prepared the amended version. After tonight's meeting, Mr. Montgomery will sign it in the presence of everyone here. The change will take effect immediately." And in that moment, hearing those words, I realized Grandpa was keeping his promise. He was making things right most straightforwardly and definitively possible. The moment the meeting ended, after the updated will had been signed in front of the entire family, Grandpa turned to Wesley and, in front of everyone, said clearly, "I want you to help Ellis file a restraining order against Damien, Skylar, and Brooklyn." The room froze for a few seconds. I looked at him, about to say something, but Grandpa continued on his own as he had already planned every step. "I don't want anything sneaky happening after today. I want no texts, no showing up at his doorstep, no dragging family drama out in public. They'll respect this decision if they still care about saving face." Wesley nodded without hesitation and replied, "I'll handle the paperwork. I'll also include a clause that if any of them deliberately spreads false information on social media, shows up at his workplace to interfere, or threatens Ellis in any way, Ellis will have full legal grounds to countersue." At that moment, I saw my mother cover her mouth like she was too shocked to speak. My father stared at the floor, not looking at anyone. Brooklyn sat with her head down, clutching the hem of her daughter's shirt like it was the only thing anchoring her. And I stayed silent, not because I didn't want to say anything, but because I didn't need to anymore. Everything that needed to be said, Grandpa had said for me. Everything that needed to be done, he had already done. And I knew, from that moment forward, nothing would ever be the same again. 3 months later, I moved back into my apartment. The lease on the sublet had ended, and the brokerage returned my keys on schedule. The day I left, Grandpa walked me to the door. He didn't say much, just gently touching my shoulder. There was something quiet in his eyes, a little heavier than usual, but he didn't try to keep me. When I offered, "Why don't you come stay with me? I can make it work," he just shook his head and smiled. "No need. I'm used to this place. Just come home for dinner on weekends. That's enough for me." And I kept that promise. I returned to his house every weekend. Just the two of us. Sometimes we ate silently. Sometimes we shared scattered thoughts that didn't need a beginning or an end. As for my parents in Brooklyn, I didn't reach out, and they didn't either. It was a complete silence that felt like my existence had never been essential to theirs, and now there was even less reason to pretend otherwise. I thought it was all behind me, that everything had finally settled. But life can pull people back to face what they thought they'd left behind. 2 weeks ago, on a Wednesday afternoon, I had just returned to my building after work when I saw Brooklyn standing outside. She didn't have her daughter with her. She stood alone, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, or trying to make herself smaller. I wasn't surprised to see her, but I didn't rush over. We just looked at each other for a few seconds. Then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Ellis, Dad's in the hospital. They say he needs surgery soon. It's expensive. Insurance only covers half. I don't have anyone else to ask." I let her finish. I listened to every word. Then I said, "Go home. I can't help you." She didn't argue. She stood there a moment longer, nodded slightly, and walked away. After she left, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I knew I had held the line, one I had once come dangerously close to losing. When I saw Brooklyn turn away that afternoon, I thought I had made the right choice. But that night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't guilt from refusing to help. It was something deeper, something unclear inside me. I didn't want to keep living with the assumption that someone was pretending or that I was being tricked again. The next morning I went to the hospital. I didn't call ahead. I just walked straight to the front desk, gave them my father's name, and asked to check his condition and the estimated cost. Everything checked out. My dad did need urgent surgery. The treatment would cost around $50,000. I didn't say a word. I quietly signed the papers and paid the full amount. Once that was done, I walked into the treatment area. When I got there, I saw my mom sitting by the hospital bed. My dad was lying down, eyes fixed on the ceiling, looking tired but alert. Both of them were caught off guard when they saw me walk in. I didn't give them time to speak. I pulled out my phone and transferred another $50,000 to my mom's account. Then I finally spoke. Grandpa's inheritance was worth $150,000. Over the year and a half I lived in London, I sent you nearly $50,000. I'm just taking back what's mine. The rest, I'm giving back to you. I paused for a moment, then continued, slow and firm. From now on, we're done. Right after that, my mom broke into tears. Through sobs, she said, I don't care about the money. I want our family to be like it used to be. I looked at her. No anger, no blame, and I said, it's too late. Then I turned around and walked away, not waiting for another reaction. That weekend, I returned to Grandpa's house like I always did. Over dinner, I told him everything. I told him about Brooklyn showing up, about going to the hospital to check things out, and about my choice to pay the medical bills and end things for good. After I finished, I looked at him and asked, are you mad at me? He didn't answer right away. He gently patted my head, then said, no, I'm proud of you. And in that moment, I felt at peace for the first time in years. Not because I had done something big, but because I knew I had chosen to hold on to what truly mattered this time. And I had finally learned how to let go of what I no longer did. After everything, I realized that not everyone who brings you into this world knows how to love you correctly. And sometimes, the thing you need to protect most isn't your family. It's your self-respect. If you're feeling what I once felt, used, pushed aside, treated like a tool instead of a person, remember this: you have the right to stop. You have the right to walk away. And you have the right to live a life where you don't need anyone's permission to feel at peace. Don't wait until the pain becomes your norm. Draw the line. Be kind to yourself first. And before I close this story, I want to ask you, the one still listening until the very end, was I wrong to give them back $100,000, then turn around and walk away for good? What would you have done if you were in my shoes in that situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear from you, those who've had to choose between family and peace. And if this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so we can spread more perspectives like this one. Thank you, and I'll see you in the following story.